November 1941. The North Atlantic churns black and silver beneath a sky that hasn't seen the sun in weeks. Somewhere in that frozen darkness, a convoy forms. 30 merchant ships, British, American, Norwegian. Their holds packed with tanks, aircraft, ammunition, the lifeblood of a nation bleeding to death on the Eastern Front. Above them, the temperature hovers at 20 below zero. The wind cuts like shrapnel. Ice forms on the rigging so fast that men work in shifts with hammers, chipping away the frozen burden before it capsizes the ship. This is the Murmansk Run, the most dangerous sea route in human history. For the next 4 years, Allied convoys will push through these Arctic waters, delivering war material to the Soviet Union under conditions that turn the ocean itself into an enemy. German U-boats hunt beneath the ice. Luftwaffe bombers circle overhead like vultures. Surface raiders, battleships, and heavy cruisers prowl the Norwegian coast, waiting. The sailors who volunteered for these convoys knew the odds. 1 in 4 ships wouldn't make it home, but they went anyway. Among them were thousands of young Americans, farm boys and city kids who'd never seen the ocean before Pearl Harbor, now staring at a sea that could freeze a man solid in 4 minutes. This is their story, the forgotten heroes of the Arctic convoys. The men who sailed through hell to keep a promise. The Arctic convoy system began not with military planning, but with desperation. June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa explodes across the Soviet frontier. 3 million German troops, supported by thousands of tanks and aircraft, smash into the Red Army in the largest invasion in human history. Within weeks, entire Soviet armies cease to exist. Within months, Leningrad is surrounded, Moscow is threatened, and Joseph Stalin sends a frantic message to London and Washington. Send us weapons, send us aircraft, send us tanks, or we will fall. Winston Churchill, despite his lifelong hatred of communism, understands the mathematics of survival. If the Soviet Union collapses, every German division on the Eastern Front will pivot west. The invasion of Britain becomes inevitable. President Franklin Roosevelt agrees, but there's a problem. How do you deliver millions of tons of war material to a nation cut off from the world? The southern route through Iran is slow, vulnerable, limited by infrastructure. The Pacific route through Vladivostok is theoretically safer, but Japanese interference and Soviet paranoia make it unreliable. That leaves one option: the Arctic route to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, the only Soviet ports accessible to Allied shipping that the Germans haven't captured. It's also the most dangerous sea route on Earth. Admiral Sir John Tovey, commanding the British Home Fleet, studies the charts in his office at Scapa Flow. The route traces a brutal arc around Norway's North Cape, skirting the edge of the polar ice pack, through waters patrolled by German submarines, aircraft, and surface ships based in occupied Norway. The distances are crushing. From Iceland to Murmansk, 1,200 nautical miles. From Scotland to Arkhangelsk, 2,000 miles. Every mile exposed to attack. Tovey writes in his diary, "This operation will cost us dearly, but the alternative is worse." The first convoy, codenamed Dervish, departs Liverpool on August 21, 1941. 7 merchant ships escorted by British destroyers and cruisers. They arrive at Arkhangelsk on August 31 without loss. It won't stay that easy. By November 1941, the convoy system is formalized. The designation PQ is assigned to eastbound convoys to Russia. QP for westbound convoys returning empty. The letters mean nothing, a random selection from the initials of a British naval planner, Commander P.Q. Edwards. But those letters will come to mean everything to the men who sail under them.
Seaman First Class Michael O'Brien stands on the deck of the SS Wakasta, a Liberty ship fresh from the yards in Baltimore, and watches the convoy assemble in Reykjavik Harbor. 23 years old, Irish Catholic from South Boston. 6 months ago, he was loading trucks at a warehouse on the docks. Now he's a merchant mariner in the U.S. Maritime Service, staring at an ocean that looks like liquid steel. The date is December 17, 1941, 10 days since Pearl Harbor. The United States is finally, officially at war. But American merchant ships have been running the Arctic route since September, carrying Lend-Lease cargo under an agreement that predates the declaration. Technically, they weren't at war then. The German submarines didn't care about technicalities. O'Brien watches the convoy form up. British merchant ships, Norwegian whalers converted to cargo haulers, and increasingly American Liberty ships, the mass-produced freighters being churned out by Henry Kaiser's shipyards at a rate of 3 per day. The Wakasta is carrying 7,000 tons of cargo in her holds. Sherman tanks lashed to the deck, crated P-40 fighters, ammunition, food, medical supplies, everything the Red Army needs to keep fighting. If they make it. The convoy commodore, a Royal Navy captain, briefs the merchant captains before departure. His voice is matter-of-fact, but his words carry weight. The journey will take 10 to 14 days, depending on weather and enemy action. You will maintain strict radio silence. You will not break formation. If you are torpedoed, the escort cannot stop to pick up survivors. They must remain with the convoy. He pauses. The water temperature is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time is approximately 4 minutes. If you go in, you won't come out. O'Brien lights a cigarette with shaking hands. The convoy departs at dawn. 23 merchant ships, 6 destroyers, 2 corvettes, 1 cruiser. Against them, 40 German submarines operating from bases in Norway, squadrons of Junkers J-88 bombers, and somewhere to the south, lurking in the fjords, the battleship Tirpitz and her escorts. The first day passes quietly. The second day brings the weather. The Arctic storm doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives. One moment the sea is rough but manageable. The next, waves the size of buildings are breaking over the bow, and the wind is screaming at 80 knots, and ice is forming on every exposed surface so fast that men can't chip it away. O'Brien is ordered topside to help with the ice. He steps onto the deck and nearly dies in the first 30 seconds. The ship is coated in ice 2 inches thick. The deck is a skating rink. The railing he reaches for is invisible beneath a frozen sheath. He slips, catches himself, feels his heart hammering. Around him, other men work with sledgehammers and axes, smashing the ice before it accumulates enough weight to capsize the ship. The wind is so loud he can't hear them shouting 3 feet away. A wave breaks over the bow, solid green water, freezing instantly as it hits the superstructure. O'Brien ducks behind a ventilator and feels the water slam into his back like a fist. His oilskin freezes stiff, his gloves freeze to the hammer. They work for 4 hours in shifts, rotating through the warmth of the crew quarters to avoid hypothermia. By the time his shift ends, O'Brien can't feel his hands. His face is raw from the wind. His eyelashes are frozen together. He stumbles below and discovers that 3 men from another ship, the British freighter Empire Gilbert, have been swept overboard during ice removal. The convoy doesn't stop, can't stop. The ships plow forward through seas that climb 40 feet and drop away into valleys of black water. The convoy scatters. Visibility drops to zero. Ships lose sight of each other in the snow and spray. When dawn comes, a pale gray smudge in the southern sky. The convoy has lost 2 ships, not to enemy action, to the sea itself.
The German attack begins on the 3rd day. A Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor, a long-range reconnaissance bomber, spots the convoy through a break in the clouds. The pilot radios the position back to Luftwaffe headquarters in Trondheim, then circles like a shark, staying just out of range of the convoy's anti-aircraft guns. Within hours, the first submarines arrive. U-134, commanded by Kapitän-Leutnant Rudolf Schendel, slips beneath the convoy's destroyer screen in the pre-dawn darkness of December 21st. His hydrophone operator listens to the thrashing propellers of 20 merchant ships above him, picking his target. The SS Alomar, an American freighter carrying aviation fuel and ammunition. Schendel fires a spread of 3 torpedoes at 600 meters. 2 miss. The third strikes the Alomar amidships, detonating in her number 3 hold. The explosion is visible for 10 miles. Aviation fuel ignites instantly, turning the ship into a floating inferno. The crew, 39 men, have less than 2 minutes to abandon ship. Those who make it to the lifeboats find themselves in water cold enough to stop their hearts. The Alomar breaks in half and sinks in 4 minutes. 12 men survive long enough to be picked up by a British corvette. Only 6 are still alive when they're pulled from the water. O'Brien watches from the deck of the Wakasta, 2 miles away. He sees the flash, hears the explosion rolled across the water like thunder, sees the fireball climb into the darkness, bright enough to cast shadows on the ice. Then he sees the ship die. He's never seen death at sea before. The totality of it, the speed. One moment, a ship full of men. The next, burning wreckage and empty water. The convoy doesn't stop. The destroyer drops depth charges, hoping to scare off the submarine, but U-134 has already slipped away, reloading her tubes. The sun doesn't rise. At this latitude in December, the sun barely clears the horizon even at midday. The convoy travels in perpetual twilight, a gray half-light that makes it impossible to judge distance or pick out submarines on the surface. The German bombers arrive at noon. 12 Junkers U-88s from Kampfgeschwader 30, based at Bardufoss, Norway. They come in low, using the snow squalls for cover, then climb suddenly and roll into their bombing runs. The convoy erupts in anti-aircraft fire. Every merchant ship carries defensive guns, usually a single 3-inch or 4-inch gun on the stern, plus .50 caliber machine guns on the bridge wings. The escorts add their heavier weapons, creating a wall of tracer fire and exploding flak shells. It's not enough. The U-88s are fast, maneuverable, and the pilots are veterans of attacks on British convoys. They know how to exploit the gaps in the defensive fire, how to time their dives, how to release their bombs at the last possible moment before pulling out. O'Brien crouches behind the steel plates of the gun tube on the Wakasta's stern, feeding ammunition belts to the gunner, watching German bombers scream past at 200 feet. He sees the bombs falling, black shapes tumbling end over end, and thinks, "Those are meant for us." The bombs miss the Wakasta by 50 yards, exploding in the water and throwing up geysers of spray that freeze instantly into ice sculptures. But they don't miss the SS Expositor, a British freighter 3 ships ahead. 2 250-kilogram bombs strike her simultaneously, one in the forward hold, one amidships. The explosions tear her open like a can opener. She lists immediately, water pouring into her guts, and within 5 minutes, she's gone. No survivors. The bombers make 3 passes, losing 1 aircraft to the combined fire of the convoy. Then they vanish back toward Norway,
leaving behind burning wreckage and oil slicks that catch fire on the frozen surface. The convoy has been underway for 4 days. They've lost 4 ships. They're not even halfway to Murmansk.
Christmas Eve, 1941. The temperature is 40 below zero. The sea is so rough that even the destroyers, built for North Atlantic storms, are taking water over their bows. Ice accumulates faster than the crews can remove it. On the Wakasta, O'Brien huddles in the crew's mess with 18 other men, drinking coffee that tastes like diesel fuel and listening to someone read from a Bible. Nobody's particularly religious, but it's Christmas Eve, and they're in the middle of the Barents Sea, and the odds of seeing another Christmas are looking worse by the hour. Someone starts singing Silent Night. The voices are rough, off-key, but sincere. O'Brien thinks about his mother in Boston, wonders if she knows where he is, wonders if she's praying for him. The ship's intercom crackles to life. "All hands, this is the captain. We've received word from the escort commander. 3 German destroyers have been spotted south of Bear Island, moving to intercept the convoy. We're altering course north, closer to the ice pack. Remain at action stations." Nobody moves for a long moment. Then they finish the song. The German destroyers never find them. The convoy slips past in the darkness and the snow, hugging the edge of the polar ice, invisible to radar and impossible to track visually. But the submarines are still there. U-454 finds the convoy on Christmas Day. Her commander, Kapitänleutnant Burkhard Hacklander, fires a spread of 4 torpedoes at the convoy's rear guard. One torpedo strikes HMS Matabele, a British destroyer. The explosion breaks her back. She sinks in 2 minutes, taking all but 2 of her 220-man crew with her. The water is so cold that men die before they can fully inhale after hitting the surface. O'Brien doesn't see it happen. He only learns about it later when the convoy commodore broadcasts a terse message. HMS Matabele lost, no survivors recovered. The convoy keeps moving. They've been at sea for 7 days now. 7 days of no sleep, no warmth, no safety. 7 days watching the horizon for periscopes and listening for the sound of aircraft engines. The strain is starting to show. Men snap at each other over nothing. Sleep becomes impossible even when off duty. The constant tension, the cold, the knowledge that a torpedo could hit at any second keeps everyone wired. On December 27th, the convoy finally enters the White Sea, the last stretch before Murmansk. They've lost 6 ships, 84 men dead, but they've delivered their cargo. The Soviet longshoremen who unload the ships at Murmansk are gaunt, hungry, exhausted. They stare at the American tanks rolling off the ships with something approaching worship. One of them, a woman barely 20 years old, frost on her eyebrows, looks at O'Brien and speaks in broken English. "Thank you," she says. "Thank you." It's the only time anyone will thank them. The westbound convoy, designated QP5, departs Murmansk on January 13, 1942. 13 empty merchant ships. The return journey should be easier. Less valuable targets, lighter ships that can sail faster. It's worse. The German Navy has reinforced its forces in Norway. More submarines, more aircraft, and intelligence that the convoys are becoming a critical supply line to the Soviets.
The attack begins before they clear the Kola Inlet. Ju-88 bombers from KG-30 hit them at dawn, flying through heavy anti-aircraft fire to drop their bombs with terrifying accuracy. The SS Waziristan, a British freighter, takes a direct hit and explodes. The SS Harmatris is set on fire and has to be abandoned. Then the submarines arrive. U-454 again, hunting the same convoy on its return leg. This time, her torpedoes find the Wakasta.
O'Brien is in the engine room when the torpedo hits. The impact throws him against a bulkhead, knocking him unconscious. He wakes to flooding, darkness, and the screaming of the ship's hull as it begins to break apart. Men are shouting. Water is pouring in. The emergency lighting flickers and dies. O'Brien crawls toward the ladder, feeling his way in the darkness, his hands finding pipes and valves and the cold, rushing water that's already waist-deep. He reaches the ladder, climbs, bursts onto the deck, into a nightmare. The ship is listing 30 degrees. The torpedo struck the port side, below the waterline, tearing open the hull and flooding 3 compartments. The crew is abandoning ship, launching lifeboats in seas so rough that one boat is immediately swamped and overturned. O'Brien runs for the starboard lifeboat, slips on the icy deck, slides toward the water, catches himself on a cleat, his fingers screaming with pain. Someone grabs his collar, hauls him back. It's the ship's cook, a man named Wilson, who drags O'Brien to the lifeboat and shoves him in. 12 men in a boat designed for 8. They cut the lines and drop 20 feet into the sea, hitting the water hard enough to crack one man's ribs. The Wakasta sinks in 8 minutes. They watch her go from 100 yards away, the ship rolling onto her side, the propeller rising out of the water like a black flower, the hull sliding beneath the surface with a sound like tearing metal. Then they're alone, in a lifeboat, in the Barents Sea, in January. The temperature is 35 below zero. The wind is 40 knots. Waves 20 feet high are breaking over the lifeboat, soaking everyone inside with freezing spray that turns to ice before it can drain away. 12 men, 1 lifeboat, no radio. They have emergency rations, hardtack biscuits, tins of corned beef, a water barrel frozen solid. They have oars. They have a canvas cover that they try to rig over the boat to block the wind. The convoy is gone. The escort ships are miles ahead, unable to turn back for survivors. They're on their own. O'Brien looks at the faces around him. Wilson, the cook. Patterson, the gunner. Rodriguez from Texas. Mackenzie from Scotland. Men he's known for 6 months. Men he sailed through hell with. None of them think they're going to survive this. But they row anyway. North, toward the Kola Peninsula, toward Murmansk. It's 180 miles away. They row in shifts, 2 men at a time, while the others huddle beneath the canvas and try not to freeze. The oars are coated in ice. Their hands bleed where the ice cuts through their gloves. The first man dies on the 2nd day. Rodriguez. Hypothermia. He stops shivering, the worst sign, and then he just stops. His eyes glaze over, his breathing slows, and stops. They can't bury him at sea, can't move him. His body freezes solid where he sits, propped against the gunwale like a grotesque statue. The second man dies on the 3rd day. Patterson. Same thing on the 4th day. They see land, a low gray line on the horizon.
the Kola Peninsula, but it's still 50 miles away, and the wind is pushing them east, away from safety. They row harder. On the 5th day, Mackenzie dies. On the 6th day, 2 more. By the time a Soviet patrol boat finds them, only 5 men are still alive. O'Brien is one of them. Barely. They pull him from the lifeboat unconscious, his body temperature 89 degrees, his fingers and toes black with frostbite. The Soviet sailors carry him to their ship, wrap him in blankets, force warm liquid down his throat. One of them, a young ensign who speaks English, looks at him and shakes his head. "You should be dead," he says. O'Brien doesn't respond, can't respond. His jaw won't work. He's taken to a military hospital in Murmansk, along with the other 4 survivors. Wilson dies that night. Another man loses both feet to frostbite and dies 3 days later from infection. O'Brien survives. He loses 3 fingers on his left hand, 2 toes on his right foot. But he survives. When he's well enough to travel, the Soviets put him on a train to Arkhangelsk, then on a ship heading west with another convoy, QP-8, in late February. He makes it home. Back to Boston. Back to his mother's apartment on Dorchester Street. Back to a world that doesn't understand what he's been through. People ask him what it was like. He tells them it was cold. He never mentions the 6 days in the lifeboat, never mentions the men who froze to death beside him, never mentions Rodriguez or Patterson or Mackenzie. Some things are too heavy to carry in words. O'Brien's experience was not unique. Between 1941 and 1945, 78 convoys made the Arctic run, 43 eastbound to Russia, 35 westbound, returning empty. 1,400 merchant ships participated, approximately 100,000 Allied sailors. They delivered 7,000 aircraft, 5,000 tanks, 15,000 vehicles, and over 150,000 tons of general cargo. They paid for it in blood. 85 merchant ships were sunk, 16 Royal Navy warships, 2 U.S. Navy ships, over 3,000 sailors killed. The casualty rate was higher than the D-Day landings, but the most infamous disaster, the event that would become synonymous with the Arctic convoys, was still to come. Convoy PQ-17, June 27, 1942. 35 merchant ships assemble in Reykjavik. 22 are American, 8 British, 5 Soviet. They carry 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, 4,246 vehicles, and over 150,000 tons of general cargo. It's the largest convoy yet to attempt the Arctic route. The escort is equally impressive. 6 destroyers, 4 corvettes, 3 minesweepers, 4 anti-aircraft ships, 2 submarines, and lurking in the distance, providing distant cover, the British home fleet, including battleships, cruisers, and an aircraft carrier. The convoy departs on June 27th.
For the first 5 days, everything goes according to plan. The weather is unusually clear, a mixed blessing. Visibility is good, but so is their exposure to German reconnaissance aircraft. The Luftwaffe spots them on July 1st. The torpedo bombers come first, Heinkel H-111s and Junkers Ju-88s flying in waves, attacking from multiple directions to overwhelm the convoy's defenses. The merchant ships tighten formation,
The escorts throw up a wall of anti-aircraft fire. The German planes press home their attacks through the barrage, dropping torpedoes from 500 yards, so close that ship gunners can see the pilots' faces. The SS Christopher Newport, an American Liberty ship, takes a torpedo amidships and sinks in 6 minutes. The SS Navarino is hit and bursts into flames, her cargo of ammunition detonating in a series of explosions that throw debris half a mile. But the convoy holds together. The escorts fight off the aircraft. Damage control crews save crippled ships. The convoy continues northeast, now just 400 miles from Murmansk. Then, British naval intelligence in London receives troubling news. The German battleship Tirpitz, sister ship to the Bismarck, has left her anchorage in Norway. She's heading north with heavy cruisers and destroyers. She's hunting PQ-17. The Admiralty in London faces an impossible decision. If Tirpitz catches the convoy, she'll slaughter it. The merchant ships are defenseless against battleship guns. The escorts can't fight a battleship. Even the home fleet, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, an aircraft carrier, is too far away to intervene in time. The only option is to scatter the convoy. Send the merchant ships in all directions. Make the Germans hunt them one by one. Hope that enough ships escape in the chaos. It's a calculated sacrifice. At 9:11 p.m. on July 4, 1942, the order is transmitted. Convoy is to disperse and proceed to Russian ports. Escort is to withdraw immediately. The merchant ship captains receive the message with disbelief. Disperse? Now? In the middle of the Barents Sea? 400 miles from safety? With German submarines and aircraft swarming? The escorts withdraw as ordered. The convoy breaks apart. 35 ships scatter like frightened sheep, each captain choosing his own course, his own fate. The massacre begins immediately. German submarines, operating in wolf packs, pick off the isolated merchant ships one by one. U-88, U-334, U-355, U-456, U-457. They stalk the scattered convoy like predators, firing torpedoes at defenseless targets. The Luftwaffe joins in. UJ-88s and Heinkel H-111s hunt individual ships, bombing them without opposition. In 72 hours, 24 ships are sunk. SS Washington, SS Alcoa Ranger, SS Fairfield City, SS Carleton, SS Daniel Morgan, SS Honomu, SS John Witherspoon, SS Olopana, SS Pan Atlantic, SS Peter Kerr, SS William Hooper. The list goes on. 153 sailors killed, 430 tanks lost, 210 aircraft destroyed, 3,350 vehicles gone, 99,316 tons of cargo sent to the bottom. It's the single greatest convoy disaster of the war. Among the survivors is Ensign Howard Carraway, a 24-year-old naval armed guard officer aboard the SS Troubadour. When the scatter order came, the Troubadour turned north, making for the edge of the polar ice pack, hoping the ice would hide them from submarines. For 2 days they sailed alone through ice fields and fog. Carraway and his gun crew remained at auction stations, scanning the sky and water for threats that could come from any direction. On July 5th, a U-88 found them. The bomber made 3 passes, dropping bombs and strafing with machine guns. Carraway's gunners fired back, their .50 calibers stitching tracers across the gray sky, but they couldn't stop the attack. A bomb struck the Troubadour's stern, destroying her steering gear and starting fires. The captain ordered "Abandon ship." Caraway helped launch the lifeboats in heavy seas, making sure every man got off before he left. 43 men in 3 boats. They watched the Troubadour burn and sink, taking her cargo to the bottom. Then they rowed north toward Novoya Zemlya, a desolate Arctic island chain 150 miles away. They rowed for 6 days, through fog, through rain, through seas that threatened to swamp the boats every hour. They had emergency rations for 3 days. By day 4, they were eating a single hardtack biscuit per man per day. By day 6, they were eating nothing. On July 11th, a Soviet patrol boat found them off the coast of Novoya Zemlya. 38 men were still alive. 5 had died of exposure. Caraway survived to write a report that was classified for decades. In it, he described the faces of the men in the lifeboats, the silent determination, the refusal to give up even when every rational thought said they were dead. He never sailed the Arctic route again, but he never forgot the men who didn't make it home. The disaster of PQ-17 forced a fundamental reevaluation of the convoy system. For 3 months, Arctic convoys were suspended, while the Allies developed new tactics, better escorts, improved coordination. When the convoys resumed in September 1942, they were different. Smaller, better protected, more ruthless. Convoy PQ-18, which sailed in September with 40 merchant ships, brought with it an escort carrier, HMS Avenger, providing air cover for the first time. German bombers attacking the convoy ran into Grumman Wildcats and Sea Hurricanes, losing 41 aircraft in 5 days of intense fighting. The convoy still lost 13 merchant ships, but it delivered 27, proving that with proper protection, the route was viable. Through 1943 and 1944, the convoys continued. American Liberty ships and British freighters made the run repeatedly, their holds packed with the weapons that kept the Red Army in the fight. By 1944, U.S. Navy destroyers were regularly escorting the convoys, adding American firepower to the defense. Ships like USS Wichita, USS Tuscaloosa, and dozens of destroyer escorts became veterans of the Arctic route. The sailors who made these runs developed a dark camaraderie. They knew the odds, knew the dangers, but they also knew what they were fighting for.
Every tank delivered was a tank facing Germans. Every aircraft was a fighter or bomber that might stop the Wehrmacht. Every ton of food meant Soviet soldiers wouldn't starve. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't celebrated. The Arctic convoys received a fraction of the attention given to Pacific battles or the invasion of France. But the veterans knew the truth. Without the Arctic convoys, the Soviet Union might have fallen. Without the Soviet Union, the war would have been lost. Simple mathematics, ugly mathematics, but mathematics nonetheless. By early 1945, the tide had turned. Germany was on the defensive. The Red Army was pushing west. The need for Arctic convoys was diminishing. The last convoy, JW-67, arrived in Murmansk on May 20th, 1945, 12 days after Germany surrendered. In total, 1,398 merchant ships had sailed north to deliver 4 million tons of cargo. The Soviet Union received enough material to equip 60 divisions, enough fuel to sustain their air force, enough food to prevent mass starvation in besieged cities. The cost was extraordinary. 3,000 Allied sailors dead, billions of dollars in ships and cargo at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean.
and for decades, their sacrifice was barely acknowledged. The Soviet Union, locked in Cold War hostility, downplayed Western assistance. British and American public attention focused on more dramatic battles. The Arctic convoy veterans came home to silence. But they knew what they'd done. Michael O'Brien returned to Boston in March 1942, medically discharged due to his injuries. He went back to work on the docks, loading the same trucks he'd loaded before the war. He never talked about the convoys, never told his wife about the 6 days in the lifeboat, never mentioned the men who'd frozen to death beside him. In 1955, he received a letter from the Soviet government, one of thousands sent to Arctic convoy veterans. It was a simple certificate of appreciation, written in Russian and English, thanking him for his service in delivering supplies to the Soviet people during their darkest hour. He framed it, hung it in his garage, where nobody would ask questions about it. He died in 1989, 3 months before the Berlin Wall fell. His obituary mentioned that he'd served in the Merchant Marine during World War II. It didn't mention the Arctic convoys, didn't mention the Wakosta, didn't mention the men he'd watched die. His daughter found the certificate when she cleaned out his garage. She didn't understand what it meant, but she kept it anyway. Howard Carraway, the naval armed guard officer from the Troubadour, survived the war and became a teacher. He taught history at a high school in Virginia for 37 years. Every year on the anniversary of PQ-17, he would pause in his classroom and tell his students one thing: freedom isn't free, and the price isn't always paid on beaches or battlefields. Sometimes it's paid in lifeboats, in the freezing dark, by men whose names nobody remembers. Then he would continue with the lesson. He died in 2003. His obituary mentioned the Arctic convoys, mentioned PQ-17, mentioned that he'd received the Navy Cross for his actions in getting his crew to safety. It was the first time most of his former students learned about any of it. The Arctic convoys represent something rarely discussed in the mythology of World War II: unglamorous sacrifice. There were no dramatic beach landings, no ace pilots shooting down enemy planes, no tank battles or infantry charges, just merchant sailors, most of them civilians, sailing through the most hostile waters on Earth to deliver cargo. Most of them were teenagers, farm boys who'd never seen the ocean, city kids who'd never been in a fight, men who'd been loading groceries or pumping gas 6 months before they were staring at an Arctic sea that wanted them dead. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They were just men doing a job that required them to face death daily for months at a time, with no glory, no recognition, and no certainty that anyone would remember. But they did it anyway, because somebody had to, because the tanks had to get through, the aircraft had to get through, the ammunition had to get through, because on the other side of that frozen hell, Soviet soldiers were fighting and dying to stop the Wehrmacht, and those soldiers needed every bullet, every gallon of fuel, every pound of food that could be delivered. The arithmetic was simple. The execution was hell. Today, there are monuments to the Arctic convoys in a handful of cities: Edinburgh, Liverpool, Murmansk. In Murmansk, a monument shows a sailor scanning the horizon,
his coat whipping in the wind. The inscription reads in Russian and English, "To the Allied seamen who braved the Arctic seas to bring us hope." Most people walk past it without stopping. But every year, on the anniversary of the convoys, a few old men gather, fewer each year, veterans who remember. They stand in silence for a few minutes. Then they leave. They don't need speeches, don't need ceremonies. They were there. They know what it meant, and that's enough. The Arctic convoys remind us that war is not just fought by soldiers with rifles or pilots in fighters. It's fought by mechanics, by cooks, by teenagers shoveling coal in engine rooms, by merchant sailors delivering cargo through waters where survival was measured in minutes. It's fought by men who never fired a shot, but who faced death every single day just by doing their jobs. They don't get statues, don't get their names in history books, but they won the war just as surely as the men who stormed the beaches or flew the bombers. They just did it in the dark, in the cold, where nobody was watching. And when they came home, they didn't talk about it, because the men who really saw the cost of freedom are usually the ones who speak about it the least. They carry it quietly, until they can't carry it anymore, and then they pass it on to the next generation. A certificate in a garage, a pause in a history classroom, a story told to a grandchild who asks, "What did you do in the war, Grandpa?" These are the chains that connect us to the truth, that freedom was bought, that the price was paid by ordinary people, that their sacrifice, unglamorous, unrecognized, often forgotten, was just as essential as any battle. The Arctic convoys weren't the longest campaign of the war. They weren't the deadliest. They didn't decide the outcome on any single day. But without them, the war might have been lost, and the men who sailed them knew it. That's why they went. Not for glory, not for recognition, because it had to be done, and because nobody else would do it. If their story moved you, if it made you remember the names the cold tried to erase, the faces frozen in lifeboats, the merchant sailors who sailed through hell because the world needed them to, then remember them, share their names, tell their stories, because they sailed into darkness so we could live in the light, and that debt can never truly be repaid, only remembered.